High Commander Vextar stood in the command center of his flagship and stared at the human delegation with something approaching disbelief. Captain Morrison had just delivered humanity's answer to the incorporation offer, and the response was so unprecedented that Vextar found himself struggling to process it. "You are refusing incorporation," Vextar said slowly, as if repeating the words might make them make sense. "That's correct," Morrison replied calmly. "Humanity chooses to remain an independent species." The other Zilithians in the command center had gone completely silent. In 3,000 years of Confederation expansion, no species had ever simply said no to incorporation. There had been attempts at negotiation requests for better terms, even desperate pleas for mercy, but never outright refusal. "Captain Morrison," Vextar said, "perhaps you do not fully understand what you are saying. Your species possesses 7 planets and perhaps 200 combat vessels. The Confederation commands 2,000 star systems and a fleet of 50,000 ships. You cannot possibly believe you can resist us." Lieutenant Colonel Walker stepped forward slightly. Morrison noticed the movement and recognized it as a combat stance. "High Commander Morrison said, we understand the odds perfectly. We also understand that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the odds." Vextar's crystalline features shifted in what his species displayed when confused. "This is irrational behavior, Captain. No intelligent species chooses extinction over prosperity." "We're not choosing extinction," Dr. Campbell interjected. "We're choosing freedom." The meeting ended badly, with Vextar promising that corrective action would begin within hours. As the human delegation returned to their ship, the High Commander immediately contacted the Confederation High Council on the capital world of Zelith Prime. "Supreme Overlord," Vextar reported, "the humans have rejected incorporation. I request permission to implement standard corrective protocols." Supreme Overlord Quindar appeared on the communication screen. His ancient features bore the weight of 3 millennia of leadership. "Rejected, Vextar. That term does not exist in our protocols. Nevertheless, Overlord, it has occurred. The humans stated clearly that they intend to remain independent and will resist incorporation with military force." There was a long pause as Quindar consulted with his advisors. "Very well. Deploy the 4th Fleet under Admiral Kethmore. A demonstration of our capabilities should restore their sanity." The 4th Fleet arrived at Proxima Colony 6 days later. Admiral Kethmore commanded 200 of the Confederation's most advanced warships. He had overseen the incorporation of 4 species during his career and expected this to be routine. What he found waiting for him was anything but routine. Admiral Rachel Stone had assembled 45 human vessels in a defensive formation around Proxima Colony. Her ships were smaller and less advanced than the Zilithian fleet, but they were positioned with tactical precision that impressed even Kethmore. "Human vessels," Kethmore broadcast, "you are ordered to stand down and prepare for inspection. Resistance will result in the destruction of your fleet and the bombardment of the colony below." Stone's response was immediate and shocking. "Zilithian fleet, this is Admiral Stone of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are ordered to withdraw from human space immediately. Any hostile action will be met with force." Kethmore had never heard anything like it. The human admiral was actually threatening him, despite being outnumbered 4-1 by ships with vastly superior firepower. "Admiral Stone," Kethmore said, "I will demonstrate our capabilities once. After that demonstration, you will surrender or be destroyed." The Zilithian fleet opened fire on a single human destroyer to show the futility of resistance. The ship called Liberty was obliterated in seconds by energy weapons that tore through its hull like tissue paper. Kethmore waited for the human surrender that would surely follow. Instead, the human fleet attacked. What happened next violated everything the Zilithians understood about warfare. The humans came straight at them in formation, abandoning all defensive positions. When their ships were damaged, instead of retreating, they pressed forward. When their weapons proved ineffective against Zilithian shields, they rammed their vessels into enemy ships. Captain Danny Walker commanded the destroyer Defiance when its main guns were destroyed by Zilithian fire. Instead of withdrawing, he ordered ramming speed and drove his ship directly into a Zilithian cruiser. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but Walker had managed to take down a ship that was 10 times more powerful than his own. Major Susan Wright led a squadron of fighters against the Zilithian flagship. Her pilots knew they couldn't penetrate the enemies' shields with conventional weapons, so they armed their fighters with improvised explosives and conducted suicide runs against the ship's weapon systems. The pattern repeated throughout the battle. When human ships lost their weapons, they used their ships as weapons. When their shields failed, they used ramming tactics. When their formations broke, they fought as individuals with a ferocity that the Zilithians had never encountered. Admiral Stone's flagship Triumph was crippled early in the battle, but she refused to surrender. Instead, she ordered her crew to abandon ship while she piloted it manually into the center of the Zilithian formation. The explosion damaged 3 enemy vessels and disrupted their tactical coordination. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Zilithian fleet had achieved complete tactical victory. Every human ship had been destroyed or disabled. Proxima Colony lay defenseless beneath their guns, but Admiral Kethmore found himself deeply disturbed by what he had witnessed. His fleet had suffered 37 casualties, including the loss of 5 major warships. The humans had fought like creatures possessed, refusing to surrender, even when their situation became hopeless. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet." "Below, display it," Kethmore ordered. The screen showed a human civilian administrator standing in what appeared to be the colony's command center. Behind him, Kethmore could see people working frantically at control stations. "Zilithian fleet," the human said. "This is Governor Pete Adams of Proxima Colony. I'm sending you the coordinates of our military installations, government buildings, and industrial centers." Kethmore was surprised. Finally, a rational human response. "Governor Adams, I accept your surrender. Prepare your people for incorporation processing." Adams smiled grimly. "I'm not surrendering, Admiral. I'm telling you where to aim because we've rigged every important building on this planet with explosives. You can have Proxima Colony, but you'll get nothing but craters." The transmission ended. Kethmore stared at the blank screen in shock. The human governor was threatening to destroy his own colony rather than let it be captured. "Sir," the tactical officer said quietly, "our sensors are detecting massive energy buildups throughout the colony. It appears they've actually done it." Kethmore realized he was facing a completely new type of enemy. The humans weren't just willing to die for their freedom, they were willing to destroy everything they had built rather than let it fall into enemy hands. He ordered the bombardment of the planet, but found only empty ruins when his ships descended to claim their prize. The humans had kept their word. Rather than submit to incorporation, they had reduced their own colony to rubble. In his report to High Command, Kethmore wrote, "The humans have been defeated militarily, but I cannot claim this as a victory. They fought with a disregard for their own survival that borders on insanity. When faced with certain death, they chose to inflict maximum casualties rather than seek terms. When faced with capture, they chose destruction rather than surrender. I have incorporated 4 species for the Confederation. In each case, the demonstration of our superior firepower convinced rational beings to accept our guidance. The humans appear to be fundamentally irrational. They do not respond to logical incentives or reasonable threats. I respectfully recommend that the High Council reconsider the value of incorporating this species. The cost of conquering humans who refuse to be conquered may exceed any benefit their worlds might provide." Supreme Overlord Quindar read the report with growing alarm. In 3,000 years, no Confederation admiral had ever recommended abandoning an incorporation. More disturbing was the casualty report. 37 Zilithian ships lost to defeat a force. 1/4 their size, the humans had lost every battle but somehow made victory feel like defeat. 4. The first time in his long life, Quindar began to wonder if the Confederation had encountered something genuinely dangerous. Not dangerous because of superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but dangerous because they simply would not stop fighting. On Earth, Admiral Foster received reports of the battle with mixed emotions. They had lost Proxima Colony and 45 ships, but they had also proven something important. Humans could hurt the Zilithians even while losing to them. "How many Zilithian casualties?" she asked Commander Price. 37 confirmed, Price replied. "Including 5 major warships," Foster nodded grimly. "Then we're learning how to fight them. The question is whether we can learn fast enough." The emergency session at Earth Defense Command began exactly 18 hours after the Discovery returned to Earth orbit. Admiral Karen Foster sat at the head of the massive conference table, surrounded by representatives from every major Earth government and military organization. The room buzzed with tension as Captain Morrison finished his report about the meeting with the Zilithians. "So, let me understand this correctly," said Secretary Helen Davis from the Colonial Administration. "These aliens are demanding that we surrender our military, our colonies, and our independence within 3 days, or they will attack us." "That's essentially correct," Morrison replied. "Though they call it incorporation and claim it's for our own good." General Alex Carter slammed his hand on the table. "This is exactly what we've been preparing for. We always knew that first contact might not be friendly. Our defense systems are ready and our fleets are positioned to respond." Secretary Davis shook her head. "Alex, be realistic. Captain Morrison described ships that could power entire cities. How exactly do you propose we fight technology that advanced?" "The same way humans have always fought," Carter replied. "With determination and ingenuity and the refusal to give up." Admiral Foster raised her hand for silence. "Before we decide anything, I want to hear from Commander Price. Nicole, what has intelligence learned about these Zilithians?" Commander Nicole Price stood and activated a holographic display. "We've analyzed every piece of data from the Discovery's encounter, plus intercepted communications from their ships. What we've found is disturbing." The display showed a timeline stretching back 3,000 years. "The Zilithian Confederation has been expanding steadily for 3 millennia. They've incorporated 12 different species during that time. Here's the pattern. First contact, diplomatic demands, military conquest, then incorporation. Every species fought back?" asked Dr. Campbell, who had been invited to attend the briefing. "Actually, no," Price replied. "That's what makes this interesting. Our analysis suggests that most species surrendered after the first military demonstration. The Zilithians would arrive with overwhelming force, destroy a few ships or orbital stations, and the target species would agree to incorporation rather than face total destruction." "Smart move," Secretary Davis muttered. "Was it though?" Price continued. "We've managed to intercept some Confederation communications. These incorporated species exist, but they're essentially slave states. Their populations have been relocated, their cultures have been eliminated, and their resources are completely controlled by the Confederation." General Carter leaned forward. "So incorporation means cultural death even if the species physically survives, correct?" Price said. "And here's the really interesting part. The Zilithians have never faced prolonged resistance. Their military doctrine is based on quick, decisive victories that convince the enemy to surrender. They've never had to fight a species that refused to give up." Admiral Foster studied the display. "What about their military capabilities?" "Overwhelming by conventional standards," Price admitted. "Their ships are faster, more heavily armed, and better defended than ours. Their energy weapons can punch through our best armor like it was paper. In a straight fight, we would lose badly." "Then we don't fight straight," Carter said. "We fight dirty." Secretary Davis looked horrified. "You're talking about condemning our entire species to extinction over pride." "I'm talking about preserving what makes us human," Carter shot back. "Helen, these aliens don't want to coexist with us. They want to erase us and replace us with obedient servants." Dr. Campbell spoke up from her position near the back of the room. "There's something else we should consider. During our meeting, I observed the Zilithians carefully. Their body language, their speech patterns, their reactions to unexpected responses. They're not used to dealing with unpredictability." "Explain," Admiral Foster said. "They operate on the assumption that all intelligent species will make rational decisions based on survival calculations." Campbell continued. "When Captain Morrison asked for time to consult with Earth, they seemed genuinely confused. I don't think anyone has ever delayed giving them an answer before." Commander Price nodded. "That matches our communication intercepts. The Zilithians discuss other species the way we might discuss particularly clever animals. They don't see them as equals, just as resources to be managed." "Which brings up an important question," Admiral Foster said. "Captain Morrison, what's your assessment of High Commander Vextar?" Morrison thought for a moment. "Arrogant. Completely convinced of his own superiority. He spoke to us like a parent explaining obvious facts to slow children. I got the impression that he's never had his authority seriously challenged." "Good," General Carter said grimly. "Arrogant enemies make mistakes." Secretary Davis looked around the room. "Are we seriously considering fighting a war we cannot win against an enemy with technology centuries ahead of ours?" Helen, Admiral Foster said gently, "What choice do we have?" If we surrender, we cease to exist as an independent species. Our children will grow up as subjects of an alien empire that sees them as barely more than livestock. At least they'll grow up, Davis replied. If we fight this war, there may be no human children at all. The debate continued for hours. Representatives from the outer colonies called in via quantum link to voice their opinions. The Mars delegation demanded immediate military preparation. The Europa scientists suggested attempting to negotiate better terms. The asteroid miners offered to convert their industrial equipment into weapons. Finally, Admiral Foster called for a vote. All in favor of accepting Zilithian incorporation. 3 hands went up out of 27 people present. All in favor of rejecting incorporation and preparing for defensive action. 24 hands rose. Secretary Davis was one of the 3 who had voted for surrender. I pray we're not making the biggest mistake in human history, she said quietly. We're not, General Carter replied. We're making the most human decision in our history. Admiral Foster began issuing orders immediately. Alex, I want every ship we have moved to defensive positions around Earth and the outer colonies. Nicole, get me everything intelligence can find about Zilithian military tactics and weaknesses. Captain Morrison, you'll return to Kepler Point with our answer. What exactly will that answer be? Morrison asked. Admiral Foster stood and looked out the conference room's massive window at the Earth below. Cities sparkled in the darkness, connected by streams of light that marked transportation routes. Orbital stations hung in the distance like artificial stars. It was beautiful and fragile and worth fighting for. Tell High Commander Vexitar that humanity respectfully declines his offer of incorporation, she said. Tell him that we intend to remain a free and independent species regardless of the consequences. Morrison nodded. And if he asks what we're prepared to do to defend that independence? Tell him he's about to find out, Admiral Foster replied. As the meeting broke up, Commander Price approached Admiral Foster privately. Karen, we need to discuss worst-case scenarios. If the Zilithians follow their usual pattern, they'll attack our strongest defensive position first, to demonstrate their superiority. Which would be Earth, Foster said. Exactly. But what if we're not where they expect us to be? Foster looked at the intelligence officer with interest. Go on. The outer colonies are more vulnerable individually but harder to attack all at once, Price explained. If we evacuate Earth's orbital defenses and spread our forces throughout the system, we force them to either commit to a long campaign or leave human resistance intact. You're talking about abandoning Earth. I'm talking about saving humanity, Price corrected. The Zilithians expect us to make a heroic last stand at our homeworld. What if we don't give them that satisfaction? Admiral Foster considered this. It went against every military tradition humans had ever developed. But then again, they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever fought. Draw up the plans, she decided. If we're going to do this, we need to be ready to implement it the moment the Zilithians make their move. Meanwhile, aboard the Discovery, Captain Morrison prepared for what might be the last diplomatic mission in human history. Dr. Campbell would accompany him again along with a new member of the team, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Walker from Earth Defense Special Operations. What's the colonel's role in this? Morrison asked Admiral Foster privately. Insurance, Foster replied. Danny's job is to observe Zilithian reactions when you deliver our answer. We need to know how they respond to unexpected resistance. Morrison looked at Walker, who was checking his sidearm with professional efficiency, and if they respond badly, then Danny's other job is to make sure you and Dr. Campbell get back to tell us about it. The Discovery departed Earth orbit 12 hours before the Zilithian deadline expired. As they traveled toward Kepler Point, Morrison found himself wondering if he was carrying humanity's Declaration of Independence or its death warrant. In less than 24 hours, they would find out which. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery and watched the alien ships approach through the view screen. 3 massive vessels moved through space with a grace that made his own ship look clumsy by comparison. Their hulls gleamed like polished crystal and seemed to bend light around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. Jake had seen many strange things during his 20 years in space, but nothing quite like this. Distance to contact point, Jake asked without taking his eyes off the approaching fleet. 2,000 kilometers and closing, sir, replied Lieutenant Ryan Brooks from the navigation station. His voice carried the tension that everyone on the bridge felt. This was humanity's first contact with intelligent alien life, and nobody knew what to expect. Dr. Lisa Campbell moved to stand beside Jake at the forward viewport. She carried a tablet loaded with every piece of information Earth scientists had managed to gather about these beings called the Zilithians. Their energy signatures are unlike anything we've seen before, she said quietly. The power output from just one of those ships could supply an entire Earth city for months. Jake nodded grimly. The message from the aliens had been polite but firm. They requested a meeting at the neutral space station called Kepler, point to discuss what they called incorporation protocols. Earth's government had sent the Discovery to represent humanity. In these first talks, "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the lead vessel," reported Communications Officer Beth. "Martinez, put it through," Jake said. The main screen flickered and then displayed the image of a being that was clearly not human. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall with skin that looked like living crystal. Its features were sharp and angular with eyes that glowed with an inner light. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. "I am High Commander Vextar of the Zilithian Confederation," the being said. "Your vessel will dock at Bay 7 of the station. You will bring no more than 3 representatives. We will begin incorporation discussions immediately upon your arrival." The transmission ended before Jake could respond. He looked at Dr. Campbell and then at Ryan. "Well, that was friendly," he muttered. "Captain," Dr. Campbell said, "I've been studying their language patterns from the messages we've received. They speak like people who are used to giving orders and having them followed without question." Jake considered this as he watched the space station grow larger on the screen. Kepler Point had been built by an unknown alien race centuries ago and abandoned. It served as a meeting place for the few spacefaring species in this region of the galaxy. The Discovery was the first human ship to visit it. "Ryan, you're with me," Jake decided. "Lisa, you too. Beth, take command while we're gone and keep the ship ready for immediate departure if things go badly." The docking procedure went smoothly despite the Discovery being designed for human ships rather than alien ones. As they walked through the station's corridors, Jake noticed that everything was built on a much larger scale than human structures. The ceilings were at least 5 meters high and the doorways were wide enough for 3 people to walk through side by side. They found the meeting room where High Commander Vextar waited with 2 other Zilithians. The aliens sat behind a curved table that seemed to be made from the same crystal material as their ships. When the humans entered, all 3 aliens stood in what appeared to be a formal greeting. "Captain Morrison," Vextar said, "I welcome you to these proceedings on behalf of the Zilithian Confederation. For 3,000 years we have brought order and prosperity to this region of space. Today we extend that same opportunity to your species." Jake took a seat across from the aliens. "We appreciate your interest in establishing relations, High Commander. However, I should clarify that I'm here to discuss possible cooperation between our peoples, not any kind of incorporation." Vextar's crystal features shifted in what might have been surprise. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding, Captain. Incorporation is not a matter for discussion. It is a standard procedure that all species in this region must undergo for their own protection and development." Dr. Campbell leaned forward. "Could you explain what this incorporation process involves?" she asked. One of the other Zilithians activated a holographic display that showed a map of local space. Dozens of star systems were marked with symbols that Jake didn't recognize. "The Confederation currently includes 12 member species," the alien explained. "Each contributes according to their abilities and receives protection and guidance in return." "What kind of contributions?" Ryan asked. "Military forces are disbanded and replaced by Confederation peacekeepers." Vextar replied matter-of-factly. "Colonial expansion is coordinated through Confederation planning councils. Resource allocation follows Confederation efficiency protocols. Cultural development proceeds under Confederation educational guidance." Jake felt his stomach tighten. That sounds less like membership and more like conquest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. All 3 Zilithians focused their glowing eyes on Jake with an intensity that made him want to step backwards. "Captain Morrison," Vextar said slowly, "perhaps you do not understand the realities of your situation. The Confederation maintains peace and order across 200 star systems. Your species controls exactly 7 worlds and possesses technology that is primitive by our standards. Incorporation is not conquest. It is salvation." "Salvation from what?" Jake asked. "From yourselves," Vextar replied. "Young species inevitably destroy themselves through war resource depletion or technological accidents. We have seen it happen countless times. The Confederation exists to prevent such tragedies. Dr. Campbell studied the holographic display. What happened to species that refused incorporation, she asked. The room fell silent. The two Zilithians flanking Vextar exchanged what might have been glances. Finally, Vextar spoke. There have been no such species, Captain Campbell. When faced with the choice between prosperity under Confederation guidance and the inevitable destruction that comes from independence, all rational beings choose wisely. Jake stood up. High Commander, I need to consult with my government before any decisions can be made. This is not something I can agree to on my own authority. Vextar also rose to his full imposing height. Captain Morrison, your species has been observed for some time. We know of your conflicts, your environmental damage, your technological limitations. The Confederation offers you a future. I strongly advise against the alternative. And what would that alternative be? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Corrective action, Vextar replied. The Confederation cannot allow a species to remain independent if it poses a threat to regional stability. Your primitive weapons and aggressive tendencies make such independence impossible. Jake looked at his two companions. Dr. Campbell appeared fascinated despite the threatening nature of the conversation. Ryan looked like he was calculating distances to the nearest exit. How long do we have to consider your offer, Jake asked. 72 hours, Vextar said. After that time, incorporation will proceed with or without your cooperation. The meeting ended with formal but cold farewells. As they walked back to their ship, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had just been presented with an ultimatum disguised as an opportunity. The Zilithians clearly expected humans to submit without resistance, just as every other species apparently had. Back aboard the Discovery, Jake ordered an immediate return to Earth. As they pulled away from Kepler Point, he watched the Zilithian ships through the rear viewers. They remained motionless like patient predators waiting for their prey to realize it had nowhere to run. Captain, Dr. Campbell said as she joined him at the viewport, I don't think they've ever had anyone say no to them before. Jake nodded grimly.
That's what worries me, Lisa. That's exactly what worries me.
The Zilithian High Council convened an emergency session following Admiral Kethamore's disturbing report from Proxima Colony. Supreme Overlord Quindar had ruled the Confederation for 800 years and never faced a situation like this. The holographic displays around the council chamber showed casualty reports, resource expenditures, and tactical analysis that painted an increasingly troubling picture. The humans have now destroyed 3 of their own colonies rather than allow capture, reported Intelligence Director Zalthek. Their military forces continue to employ suicide tactics that inflict disproportionate casualties on our fleets. Most disturbing, they appear to be adapting their strategies based on our previous encounters. Admiral Zixara, the Confederation's most experienced military commander, studied the tactical reports with growing concern. Supreme Overlord, I have reviewed all available data on human combat behavior. These beings do not fight like any species we have previously encountered. They seem to view warfare as a form of communication rather than a means to achieve victory. Explain, Quindar demanded. Traditional warfare follows logical patterns, Zixara replied. Species fight to achieve specific objectives. When those objectives become impossible to achieve, rational beings seek alternative solutions. The humans appear to fight simply to demonstrate that they cannot be conquered. Victory and defeat seem irrelevant to them. On the outer rim of human space, Admiral Ben Torres was implementing what Earth Defense Command called the Scorched Earth Protocol. As Zilithian forces approached each human colony, Torres had orders to evacuate all personnel and destroy everything of value. The aliens could claim empty worlds, but they would gain nothing useful from the conquest. Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the evacuation of New Geneva proceed with mechanical efficiency. Civilian transports lifted off from the planet's surface, carrying refugees to hidden bases in asteroid fields and gas giant moons. Military engineers worked frantically to plant explosives in mining facilities, orbital platforms, and industrial centers. Admiral reported Captain Lucy Morgan from the destroyer Wolverine. Civilian evacuation is complete. All personnel are clear of the surface. Detonate the charges. Torres ordered without emotion. The planet below erupted in carefully planned explosions that reduced centuries of human development to smoking craters. When the Zilithians arrived, They would find nothing but ruins and a message broadcast on all frequencies. This is what we do to prevent our hard work from serving alien masters, Dr. Martin. Hughes worked in a secret laboratory hidden deep within an asteroid belt, developing weapons specifically designed to target Zilithian physiology. His team had analyzed wreckage from the battle at Proxima Colony and discovered that the aliens were vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies that barely affected humans. The crystalline structure of their nervous systems makes them susceptible to resonance disruption, Hughes explained to his research team. If we can generate the right frequency at sufficient amplitude, we can essentially scramble their brain functions. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who served as military liaison for the project, looked skeptical. How do we deliver this frequency in combat conditions, Dr. Hughes? Suicide bombers? Hughes replied matter-of-factly. Small ships equipped with resonance generators that ram Zilithian vessels and detonate at close range. The pilots won't survive, but neither will the alien crews. Kim felt sick, but she understood the logic. Human technology couldn't match Zilithian shields or weapons, but human determination could overcome technological disadvantages through sheer bloody-minded persistence. Meanwhile, on Zelith, Prime Young Science Officer, Valana was conducting unauthorized research into human history and psychology. What she discovered horrified her. Humans had been fighting wars against impossible odds for their entire recorded history, and they seemed to get more dangerous the more desperate they became. Look at these historical records, she told her colleague researcher Nexel as they studied classified human databases. During their Second World War, humans fought for 6 years against enemies who initially held overwhelming advantages. The more territory they lost, the more creative their resistance became. That's irrational behavior, Nexel replied. Any logical species would have negotiated peace terms. But they didn't, Valana insisted. They kept fighting until their enemies were completely destroyed. And here's the terrifying part. They call it their finest hour. The pattern was repeated throughout human history. Outnumbered defenders at places called Thermopylae and the Alamo had fought to the last man not because they could win, but because their sacrifice would inspire others to continue the fight. Humans seem to view hopeless last stands as victories if they inflicted enough casualties on the enemy. Admiral Zixara was discovering this human philosophy firsthand as she led the Second Fleet in a campaign to capture the industrial worlds of the Centauri system. What should have been a simple mop-up operation had turned into a nightmare of guerrilla warfare and terrorist attacks. Human forces under Admiral Torres had abandoned conventional tactics entirely. Instead of defending fixed positions, they launched hit-and-run attacks against Zilithian supply lines. Instead of protecting their bases, they rigged them with explosives that detonated when enemy forces approached. Instead of preserving their ships for future battles, they used them as guided missiles targeting Zilithian command vessels, Admiral, reported her tactical officer. After the latest engagement, we've destroyed another human task force but lost 2 cruisers to ramming attacks. Our casualty rate is approaching 15% and we haven't even reached the main objectives yet. Zixara studied the tactical displays with growing frustration. Every victory felt like a defeat because the humans made her pay such a terrible price for it. What's the status of the Second Fleet's morale, she asked her staff psychologist. Deteriorating, the psychologist admitted. Our crews are beginning to question whether human worlds are worth the cost of conquering them. Some officers are privately suggesting that we simply isolate human space and declare it a quarantine zone. The suggestion was treasonous, but Zixara understood the sentiment. Fighting humans was like trying to hold a flame with bare hands. You might succeed, but the cost was so painful that victory became meaningless. On Earth, Commander Price presented her latest intelligence assessment to Admiral Foster and the Defense Council. The Zilithians are having internal debates about continuing the war, she reported. We've intercepted communications indicating significant disagreement within their High Council. What kind of disagreement? Foster asked. Some of their leaders are questioning whether incorporating humanity is worth the cost, Price explained. They've never faced this level of sustained resistance before, and it's affecting their military and civilian populations. General Carter leaned forward with interest. Are you saying we might actually be winning this war? Not winning in any conventional sense, Price replied. We're losing every battle and they're capturing our territory. But we're making conquest so expensive that some Zilithians are wondering if they should just leave us alone. Dr. Campbell, who had been studying Zilithian psychology since the first contact, nodded thoughtfully. It makes sense from their perspective. They're used to quick, clean victories that demonstrate their superiority. This messy, prolonged conflict undermines their image of themselves as the galaxy's natural rulers. Admiral Foster studied the tactical map showing the current state of the war. Humanity had lost 4 colonies and dozens of ships, but Zilithian casualties were mounting steadily. More importantly, Zilithian confidence was beginning to crack. The question is whether we can hold out long enough for their doubts to turn into withdrawal, Foster said. Every day we continue fighting is another day their casualties mount and their people question this war. Admiral, Captain Morrison said from his position at the communications station, we're receiving a priority transmission from deep space. It's Captain Phillips of the Ranger. Jeff Phillips appeared on the main screen looking haggard but determined. Admiral Foster, I'm transmitting from just outside the Zilithian home system. My team has identified a target that could change the course of this war. Explain, Captain, Foster ordered. The Zilithian command ship that coordinates their entire fleet, Phillips replied. It's heavily defended, but if we could destroy it or capture it, we might be able to broadcast a message throughout their space. Something that shows them exactly what they're dealing with. Foster understood immediately. The Zilithians still thought they were fighting a conventional war against a rational enemy. It was time to show them the truth about what they had chosen to fight. Captain Jeff Phillips led his strike team through the outer defenses of the Zilithian home system, knowing that none of them expected to survive the mission. The stealth ship Ranger had been modified with every piece of human technology that might help them penetrate enemy space undetected. Behind them followed 12 volunteers and small attack craft, loaded with Dr. Hughes's resonance weapons. Target acquired, reported Lieutenant Tony Garcia from the navigation station. Zilithian command ship is holding position in high orbit around their homeworld. Defensive screen includes 40 escort vessels. Philip studied the tactical display and felt his stomach tighten. The Zilithian command ship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of Earth's largest battleship. Its crystalline hull gleamed with energy fields that made it look like a floating cathedral made of living light. Remember the mission, Phillips told his team. We're not here to destroy that ship. We're here to get close enough to broadcast our message throughout their communication network. The attack began badly. Zilithian sensors detected the human ships long before they reached their target. Admiral Zixara herself commanded the defense, and she had no intention of allowing human terrorists to threaten the Confederation's most important vessel. All units engage, she ordered. Destroy the human ships before they can approach the command vessel. Energy beams lanced out from the escort ships, turning 3 human fighters into expanding clouds of debris. But the remaining humans pressed forward with the same suicidal determination that had characterized every engagement in this. Ward Lieutenant Maria Santos flew her fighter directly into the path of a Zilithian destroyer trading her life to clear a corridor for the other ships. Pilot Frank Chen detonated his resonance weapon against an enemy cruiser, sending crystalline fragments spinning through space as the alien crew died screaming. Phillips watched his people die one by one while driving the Ranger deeper into the enemy formation. When the ship's shields failed, he kept going. When the weapon systems were destroyed, he ordered ramming speed toward the command vessel. Sir, Garcia shouted over the noise of exploding systems, we're not going to make it. They have too many ships. We'll make it, Phillips replied grimly, even if we have to walk there. The Ranger's hull began breaking apart under concentrated fire from a dozen Zilithian ships. Phillips knew they had perhaps 30 seconds before the ship was completely destroyed. He activated the communication system and began broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Commander Jeff Phillips of the Human Colonial Defense Force, he said, as his ship died around him. We are transmitting this message throughout Zilithian space, so that your people can understand exactly what you have chosen to fight. The transmission reached every Zilithian communication device in the system. On the homeworld below, millions of civilians heard a human voice speaking to them with calm determination even as his ship was being blown apart. You believe that all intelligent species will surrender when faced with superior force, Phillips continued. You believe that rational beings will choose survival over freedom. You believe that we will eventually see the wisdom of accepting your rule. An explosion tore through the Ranger's bridge, killing Garcia and destroying half the control systems. Phillips kept talking. "You are wrong. We will never surrender. We will never accept your rule. We will never stop fighting. And every day you continue this war, we become more dangerous to everything you care about." The final explosion consumed the Ranger, but not before Phillips delivered his last words. "This is what we do to those who try to enslave us. We make the cost so terrible that you eventually decide we're not worth conquering." Throughout Zilithian space, civilians listened to the broadcast with growing horror. For the first time they heard a human voice speaking directly to them, and what they heard was utterly alien to their understanding of intelligent behavior. On Zelith Prime Science Officer, Velana was watching the broadcast with her research team when she realized the implications. "They're not fighting to win," she said quietly. "They're fighting to make us afraid of them." "That's impossible," her supervisor replied. "Fear is not a rational basis for strategic planning." "It is for humans," Velana insisted. "Look at their history. They've done this before. They make themselves so dangerous to fight that their enemies eventually decide to leave them alone." The broadcast had an immediate effect on Zilithian society. For 3,000 years, the Confederation had presented itself as the galaxy's benevolent protector, bringing order to chaotic younger species. The idea that an entire civilization would choose death over their guidance challenged everything they believed about themselves. Supreme Overlord. Quindar convened an emergency session of the High Council as reports poured in from across Confederation space. The human broadcast had been heard by billions of citizens, and their reaction was unprecedented. "Overlord," reported Social Monitor Dex Han, "we're receiving thousands of communications from civilian populations requesting information about the war with humans. Many are questioning why we're fighting a species that poses no threat to Confederation security." "No threat," Admiral Zixara protested. "They've destroyed over 100 of our ships." "Only because we attacked them first," Science Officer Velana said. She had been summoned to brief the Council on her research into human psychology. "My analysis indicates that humans are essentially defensive in nature. They don't seek to conquer other species, but they will fight to the death to prevent being conquered themselves." Quindar studied the casualty reports with growing alarm. 6 months of war against humanity had cost the Confederation more ships and personnel than the previous century of expansion combined. Worse, the human resistance showed no signs of weakening despite their military defeats. "What are you recommending?" he asked Velana. "Withdrawal," she replied simply. "The humans have demonstrated that conquering them would require destroying them completely. The cost of such genocide would far exceed any benefit their worlds might provide." The debate that followed lasted for days. Some council members argued that Confederation prestige required completing the incorporation of humanity, regardless of cost. Others pointed out that continuing the war risked inspiring other subject species to rebel. Finally, Admiral Zixara provided the decisive argument. "Overlord, I have commanded fleets for 2 centuries. I have incorporated 6 species for the Confederation. In my professional opinion, the humans cannot be conquered by any means short of planetary extermination. They do not respond to rational incentives, and they do not acknowledge defeat even when completely overwhelmed. Moreover," she continued, "continuing this war poses a greater threat to Confederation stability than allowing human independence. Our military casualties are affecting morale throughout the fleet. Our civilian populations are questioning the necessity of this conflict. If we persist, we risk undermining the very order we seek to preserve." The vote was closer than it should have been, but wisdom prevailed. The Confederation agreed to offer humanity a non-aggression pact in exchange for human agreement to remain within their current territory. Hi. Commander Vextar arrived at Earth 3 weeks later carrying an offer that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zilithian Confederation was requesting peace talks with a species they had failed to conquer. Captain Morrison met him aboard the same space station where this conflict had begun. The meeting was much different this time, with Vextar showing a respect for human representatives that had been completely absent during their first encounter. "Captain Morrison," Vextar said, "the Confederation is prepared to offer humanity a mutual non-aggression agreement. We will respect your territorial boundaries and make no further attempts at incorporation in exchange for your agreement to limit expansion beyond your current systems." Morrison considered the offer carefully. It wasn't everything humanity might have wanted, but it was more than anyone had dared hope for when this war began. High Commander. Morrison replied, "We accept your proposal with one modification. Humanity reserves the right to defend any species that requests our protection against forced incorporation." Vextar's crystalline features shifted in what Morrison had learned to recognize as shock. The humans were demanding the right to interfere in future Confederation expansion. After a long pause, Vexitar nodded reluctantly. "Agreed, Captain. The Confederation acknowledges human territorial sovereignty and accepts your stated right to provide defensive assistance to threatened species." As they signed the treaty, Morrison couldn't help but ask, "High Commander, what changed your mind about incorporating humanity?" Vextar was quiet for a long moment. "Captain Morrison, in 3,000 years of expansion, the Confederation has never encountered a species quite like yours. We have learned that there are worse things than losing a war." "Such as?" Morrison asked. "Winning one against humans?" Vextar replied quietly. "The news of the peace treaty spread throughout the galaxy within weeks. 17 different alien civilizations sent diplomatic missions to Earth requesting formal contact with the species that had forced the mighty Zilithian Confederation to negotiate as equals." "Admiral," Foster read the reports in her office, "overlooking the rebuilt orbital shipyards around Earth.